Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
24 hours on in Washington, D.C., they're still talking about a threat beyond the clouds, in space, where modern warfare has gone before, and reportedly Putin is going again. But whatever the truth is out there, down here, details had been thin on the ground.
I can confirm that it is related to an anti-satellite capability that Russia is developing.
Now, there's more.
First, this is not an active capability that's been deployed. And though Russia's pursuit of this particular capability is troubling, there is no immediate threat to anyone's safety.
Weaponry in space is nothing new. The American politicians who first leaked news of this development had spoken of a serious national security threat. The worry is about the risk faced by the global network of satellites, over 8,000 of them. In orbit now, the number used for communication stands at over 4,500. They include Elon Musk's Starlink network. Satellites looking down on the Earth number more than 2,000, including hundreds of military craft. And there are more than 300 navigation satellites, powering everything from maps on our phones to global shipping. The major concern is that a Russian nuclear-powered satellite could use its energy stores to send a pulse of electromagnetic energy, frying the circuits of Western satellites with the aim of leaving Russia's intact. These are pictures of Russia's defense minister visiting a company producing electronic warfare systems designed for space.
The Russians haven't launched any nuclear-powered satellites since the late 1980s, early 1990s. But we know there is evidence that they resumed this program about 2014. That is when this top-secret nuclear-powered project seems to have started.
Space watchers here are eyeing the potential threat.
What makes more sense is the possibility of some sort of space-based jammer. That is to say, a satellite that may get up close to other satellites and try and interfere with the signals coming from them, and that perhaps there's a nuclear power source for part of that.
Moscow has dismissed the claims as a ruse to engineer U.S. support for aid to Ukraine. Over time, Russia's ambition in space has evolved.
Our cameras are some 12 kilometers from the pad.
Today, it looks different, but still in Washington, doesn't land well. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Russian space nukes and America's national security. Welcome back to Training Tuesday and the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv and X Spaces simulcast. Well, Russia has space-based nuclear weapons. That's the clarion call issued by the House Armed Services Committee chairman during an attempt to get a $65 billion check sent to Ukraine and unstuck out of the House of Representatives. But one of the big questions is, once the truth came out that while the threat of an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, nuclear detonation in space, is existential, is that Russia has not fielded any such system yet. So we ask, what is the technology required to achieve this kind of capability? Or does it already exist? Even more importantly is another question. Why this capability, and what is the risk incurred by any country that takes this step in putting nuclear weapons in orbit? Well, my guest today is retired U.S. Navy commander, F-18 Hornet weapons systems officer or backseater, a flight test officer. He's been a National Reconnaissance Office liaison officer and an integrated project team lead for the NRO. He's a space and launch operations division director experienced. And in other words, this guy's a literal rocket science and a military space operations expert. Jason Pratt, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here with you, and looking forward to this Training Tuesday.
Yeah, we appreciate having you on, man. Well, I said a little bit about your background, but what is your job today? And go into a little bit more depth on why this audience should be so privileged to have you as an instructor today on satellite nukes and all kinds of stuff like that.
Well, thank you, sir. Yes. So currently, I do work launch integration for a company and provide support to government and commercial space launch activities. And my background in space operations and space acquisitions. So
And it looks like we've lost Jason there. We'll work on getting him back and everything. And while we're waiting on that, what is the issue I want y'all to think about with a country that puts devices like nuclear warheads into space? Think about all of the environmental concerns as far as the devices themselves and what the space orbital environment does to them. What things have to be done to provide power, because none of these things work without some kind of power. How long can they last? What happens to our atmosphere if a nuclear weapon detonates above the atmosphere just far enough to be outside of it, but the explosion, shock wave, and radiation itself penetrates the atmosphere? Does something happen to this protective covering around the globe that is what makes the Earth habitable? Well, it looks like we've got Jason back. And Jason, welcome back. Sorry about that. That's what happens with technology, as you're well aware. You were speaking a little bit about more about what your background is to have this discussion.
yeah, I'm not sure where I cut off there, but suffice it to say, as a military officer, flying combat missions in the air, and then taking my background from that into space, and considering the tactics and strategies and implications of spaceborne assets is then something that we did. And then I did work in both unclassified and classified space operations, everywhere from spacecraft design, building, integration, testing, launching, and then operations as well.
That's great. So let's get down to some tactical detail. I want to bring up the consolidated orbits chart and let you speak to that just as in a training instructor mode to teach people about what we're talking about when it comes to orbits and what's currently where and that kind of issue.
Yeah, and this is an important chart. This is even something that we have to routinely educate our government officials about, particularly those that either write the checks to acquire spacecraft or even employing them. We have specific orbital regimes, and spacecraft really do not transit between those orbital regimes or specific orbits. And so I'll simplify it as basically we have the low Earth orbit, a medium Earth orbit, which we call LEO and MEO, and then a HEO, which is a highly elliptical orbit, which kind of transits between LEO up to MEO, or maybe even beyond. The next one, which would be our GEO orbit, which is geostationary Earth orbit, and then that would be the last one. And then there's specific ones of unique cases. Satellites typically rotate around the Earth in what we call a prograde orbit, which means they will go from kind of the west towards the east and orbit that way, but they can also go retrograde, going from east to west. And then we can also have polar orbits that go around the poles in either direction. And then there's a few other special case orbits. And the orbits can be inclined at various degrees. I think there's another slide there, but we'll stay on this one for now. Yeah, there you go. So you can see the different angles there. We call those inclinations. And those inclinations can be anywhere from 0 to about 179 or 180 degrees, and that would just be how much tilt there is on those specific orbits. And again, this chart's good. It just shows you a good rough understanding of low Earth orbit being about 500 to 1,200 kilometers, going out to the medium Earth orbit, or MEO, at 5,000 to 20,000 kilometers, and then GEO is pretty much right around the 36,000 kilometer mark, plus or minus just a little bit. And those orbits are important based on those altitudes. Those orbits are maintained based on the satellite's speed or orbital velocity. And so 36,000 kilometers is unique because the speed necessary to maintain that orbit matches the rotation of the Earth on its axis. And therefore, those geostationary satellites basically stay approximately over the same location on Earth. So if you were to look up, they would not be moving in any particular direction. They're just too far out to actually see. But most of our satellite TV and satellite communications satellites are out there in geostationary Earth orbit, or GEO. And so, yeah, and this slide's good for showing, the radius of the orbit and then the orbital speed down there. And so the x-axis showing their orbital altitude or the radius of their orbit, and then their speed on the negative y-axis going downward at the 6 o'clock, and then going up towards 12 o'clock tells you the orbital period, right? So if an orbital period is 24 hours, or 23.9 Earth hours, then it's going to stay in the same location and rotate at the same speed as the Earth and stay stationary. And then you can see like the International Space Station is down there pretty low, coming about every hour and a half, 2 hours ish, and it's at a particular inclination. So each of these regimes are important because we have
250 miles.
Yes. Yep. Correct.
The ISS is about 250 miles. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So
I just wanted to ask one more question before we go to our audience and let them ask you a question before the break, Jason, and that is, so in geostationary orbit, the device is, if it's looking at the Earth, it's staring at the same spot all the time, and it's rotating at the same speed as the Earth. Geostationary. That's why we do that, right? If I understood that correctly.
that's correct. Yeah. So and geostationary specifically is going to be at a 0 inclination. So it's going to be right on the equator. So it's not going to move at all. You can have geosynchronous satellites that are synchronized with the Earth, and they're going to have a slight inclination. So they would actually carve a small figure 8 in the sky if you could see them, but they would be maintaining a slight inclination above and below the equator. So a lot of our, again, satellite communications and satellite TV satellites are at that GEO with a small inclination, typically around 3 degrees, maybe as much as 12 degrees, but usually, a little less than 12. So that's what allows you to get your satellite TV, and you just point your antenna dish in one fixed location in the sky, and you can receive your satellite TV that way.
Absolutely. Well, let's go over to the audience and let them ask a question before we go to the break. And go ahead and bring up, when we do that, go ahead and bring up the traffic congestion slide, is what I call it, Reagan. Okay, Shell, Kat, I see a hand up over there. Questions for Jason. Hopefully for Jason, because I know enough about this stuff to hurt myself.
Go ahead, AJ.
Thank you very much, Colonel Mike. Thank you, Colonel. I have a question. On September 13th, 1985, the United States, via Major Robert Pearson, who was an F-15 pilot, destroyed one of its own satellites to send a message to the USSR, to Moscow, that, we could to them also. Over the years, I'm just assuming, just trying to echo this off of you guys as to what you think. Maybe that lesson has been lost on Moscow, or maybe they forgot about it, or they don't think we have the chops. What is your 2 cents on that? Thank you.
Well, let him answer that question after the break, AJ. Right now, we've got to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back with space launch expert, spacecraft expert, Jason Pratt, here on the Rob Maness Show at Patriot.tv Live. What the question is, we've done it before and the Russians know it. We'll be right back.
My story started with alcohol, and I had tried going to other treatments, and all I did was think about how I was not going to drink or how I was going to drink one more day and then stop the next day. And Katie had found a treatment. I thought it was kind of hokey.
I could see a couple days into it, it's like the light bulb went on with him.
It's an IV infusion of all natural NAD. It saved my life and my family.
We've been where you sit.
The hardest part of this is making that phone call and just come in and talk to us.
Joining me at the news desk now is Rebecca Walzer of WalzerWealth.com. She has been a regular guest on my TV show, Brennan House Live, for a long time. She's not just an economics expert, but she's an attorney. Rebecca, you have a large firm. How many people work for your firm?
Just about 30, yes.
30. And
yes.
Tell me, how can people prepare for what's coming with the end of the dollar as we know it?
The end of the fiat system as we know it globally. We are moving to hard asset-backed currencies again. Thank the Lord, because fiat is where we get into all the problems. When you have debt-based currency, you have debt-based problems. And the United States, unfortunately, since 2020 has not stopped spending at pandemic levels. This is systemic, and it is unsustainable, and it is coming to an end, especially with the addition of Saudi Arabia and the UAE to the BRICS nations. This is what controls our petrodollar. This is the threat immediately in 2024.
For more information, WalzerWealth.com. WalzerWealth.com. She is not your traditional financial planner. Find out why at WalzerWealth.com.
Tonight, the White House is confirming a new national security threat, that Vladimir Putin's Russia is hell-bent on putting an anti-satellite system into space. The Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee first set off alarms, and now a U.S. official tells CNN that the threat may not be a weapon designed to attack humans, but it is still cause for concern inside of the Pentagon. For more on this, I want to bring in astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's the author of Accessory to War, the Unspoken Alliance Between Astrophysics and the Military.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me.
Scary stuff.
It's all scary.
You have been raising concerns about this for years. So these new revelations, what do you make of where this fits in?
Well, so people have been concerned forever about the militarization of space. But in fact, ever since we've had access to space, in a way, it's been militarized because it's been used as a high ground for spying. Right. And it turns out to be not especially useful for parking weapons that you would then deploy later. Because space, you can't just stay there, you're in orbit. And if you want to deploy a weapon, you kind of have to be near where your target is supposed to be for you to hit it. Meanwhile, we already have intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Right.
You can launch a missile from any place on Earth and hit any other place within 45 minutes. So space-based weaponry has been overplayed in movies and in our fears, but really another factor is if you're going to go up and start smashing satellites, that's forgive the expression, but it's like peeing in your own bathtub because you make a mess of all of space.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show on Patriot.tv Live, and it's Training Tuesday. We're talking with space operations and spacecraft expert and combat veteran, by the way, U.S. Navy retired Commander Jason Pratt, about this very issue, Jason. And before the break, AJ asked a really good question that was a good lead into this segment, and that is, we did this before in 1985 with what's called an anti-satellite or ASAT air-launched weapon off of an air-breathing platform. I think it was an F-15C. Have the Russians forgotten that?
Yeah, AJ asked a great question. He was a good plant because that's a good segue into this.
I don't plant questions here, so.
Oh, it was fortuitous. There's a couple topics, I think, 2 points in his question, and keeping with the Training Tuesday, let's do a little training first. The first is, the concept of ASATs, right? Anti-satellite weaponry, and they come in a variety of flavors. He brought up one particular one. which we call DA or direct ascent weapons. And they're essentially missiles with or without a warhead, because later on Neil will discuss the sheer velocity of the satellites traveling in space. They already contain a great deal of momentum and kinetic energy, so you don't need necessarily an explosive to just completely shatter a satellite on orbit. But nonetheless, yes, that F-15C model launched a direct ascent anti-satellite missile to shoot down a satellite, one, to demonstrate the capability, and two, to kind of just alert the international community of that capability and that America possessed it. Now, since that time, there have been several other direct ascent attacks. We have, in 2007, China did it, which created quite a mess. And the international community responded pretty strongly against China for that, because it did create an incredible debris field that we are tracking. We're tracking down to softball size pieces that resulted from that destruction of their satellite, which then puts every other satellite in danger. So you can consider just the size of a pea traveling at the speeds that are going on in space there. A pea-sized piece of a satellite carries as much momentum as a cannonball shot out of a cannon. And so very significant. And we get smaller pieces that impact the space station and leave pretty good size divots in the windows and other parts of that spacecraft. So that's a big concern. Other weapons, though, to be considering are not just those direct ascent, but also directed energy, laser beams, and RF energy. EMP could be considered a directed energy weapon potentially, but it tends to be more of a shotgun than a sharpshooter than a rifle. There's also jamming of both uplink and downlink signals that are going up to the satellite or coming down. So those would be command and control or programming or mission directions going up to the satellite, and then mission data and telemetry coming down from the satellite. So you could jam either one or both, and that would cause some difficulties for the spacecraft. And then you also have cyber attacks that could attack the specific spacecraft or the ground station. And then you also have kinetic attacks or cyber attacks against the ground stations that are either used for the mission data or for controlling this, flying the spacecraft. So those are all relevant types of ASAT technology that we need to be concerned about. Now,
But this desire is even much older than that, right? Especially when it comes to nukes. Operation Starfish Prime, which was conducted by us, I think, the year after I was born. So I was 1 year old. That's how old this effort is to be able to smash stuff up in space. What was that? And what did we learn from that operation?
Yeah, that was impressive. That was in 1962. Happened out of the Pacific. A missile, a nuclear missile. I forget the yield, was launched larger than what hit Hiroshima, and that was exploded in low Earth orbit. And the effects of it were kind of studied, and studied actually for many years, even till today. The after effects are still somewhat present. It caused a kind of a geomagnetic storm, if you will, resulting from the nuclear blast and the EMP that resulted, and that did in fact impact spacecraft. There weren't a whole lot. I think there were less than a dozen spacecraft on orbit at the time, but it did affect a number of America's own spacecraft, and that's when we found out the impact of nuclear detonation and the magnetic and radio waves that resulted and get kind of captured within the magnetic sphere of our planet, and kind of continues to travel for decades after. And so it does create some problems. Some additional considerations, though, is that it did impact the design and build of spacecraft. They're more hardened. Basically, the environment that all satellites are living in outside, particularly the Van Allen belt, which was in one of the slides there, is very inhospitable. It's a very treacherous environment, both thermally, with the temperatures both positive, as hot as your oven, and then negative, colder than any refrigerator on Earth. And there we go. I think that I forget which one. Does it show the Van Allen belt? I think I sent one that had the Van Allen belt. And
Geo.
yeah, so the that environment's very inhospitable, very dangerous, and so we've hardened satellites. Some satellites could take a great deal of it, but again, that's costly and all the components that go into it, and some are less fortified, so they can succumb to even solar storms, and while others do not. Additionally, I don't know if it's necessarily a result. There you go, the inner Van Allen belts on this one. Yeah, so as a result, maybe of that Starfish prime test, there's something that has been studied a little bit, has presented itself as a problem for satellites. And I think I have another picture of that, and that's called the South Atlantic anomaly. The South Atlantic anomaly, there it is a concentration of a magnetic and electromagnetic field that changes. We're not sure exactly how. That's why it's called an anomaly. It changes apparently with weather, with our magnetic magnetosphere, as well as maybe with solar storms, and maybe that was something that was captured as a result of the Starfish Prime. I haven't heard any real hypotheses as to what causes that, but nonetheless, that South Atlantic anomaly, or the SAA, is a real thing, and typically satellites will fly through that and may experience some kind of anomaly itself, and it may miss some communications, either receiving or transmitting. Sometimes we get something called an SEU, or a single event upset, where the satellite takes a 1 and turns it to a 0, or a 0 and turns it to 1, and that may turn off or on certain parts of the satellite, maybe heaters, maybe transmitters, maybe parts of payloads or other things. And so that can cause the satellite to go into an anomaly or a safeguard state. And sometimes you have to kind of reboot it, as if, like you do your computer, you have to turn it off and turn it back on. And that can cause some problems depending on the spacecraft. So the SAA is there as well, and satellites have to go through that and handle that. And that's essentially like traveling through a minor EMP every day for some of them.
Yeah, one of the questions I had about the Starfish Prime piece was, did we learn anything about what the nuclear detonation at 200, I think it was at 250 miles, so about the same height to the ISS, does to the atmosphere itself, or be able to make any predictions about what even larger weapons would do, or at various altitudes? Since the nuclear detonation is not going to be a debris wave, it's going to be primarily it's going to be a pure explosive and radiation wave as it hits that atmosphere. Did we learn anything about that? It just bodes a bad for my little brain about, this risk is really high.
Yeah, we sure did. It impacted Hawaii and the west coast of America, and then later on larger parts of America and maybe even South America. There wasn't a whole lot of technology that was going to be as largely affected as it today, but radios certainly were impacted, and some TV stations and things like that. Anything that required RF energy today, that's pretty much everything. Medical devices, our trade, our TV, our entertainment, communications devices everywhere from radios, cell phones, emergency medical, you name it. It's across the board and prevalent. And so, yes, we in the international community certainly did learn, I think, a very strong, powerful lesson. And, America was not too popular after the fact and for conducting that, but it did prove out the capability, the threat, and the reality of an EMP, and just what happens when a nuclear device is detonated on orbit. And so I think in large, the international community is not terribly interested really in exploring that further. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out there's other ways, and I pointed out other ASAT technologies other than blowing stuff up or impacting satellites, creating huge debris fields, because they will impact your satellites as well. So if Russia does this, it will by certainly affect all of their spacecraft, all of the spacecraft of their ally China. Even Iran is working on putting spacecraft up, and the entire international community. It would affect trade, commerce, science, research, communications, you name it, location. So the Baidu satellites and the GLONASS satellites are the Chinese and Russian equivalents of our GPS. And the world uses all those. My Garmin watch right here uses all three to locate me and track my exercise and things that I do. So all of these things would be dramatically impacted, and not to mention then the impacts of terrestrial, continental infrastructure that would potentially shut down their electrical grids and everything else that goes along with it. So the impacts on that would be very extreme, both terrestrially as well as extraterrestrially. So both on Earth and in outer space. So very significant. So I don't see a whole lot of intelligent military strategic benefit for doing that unless the countries are willing to accept.
Doesn't seem to be much upside. Doesn't seem to be much upside, Jason. I think we've got a little bit of a delay, so there just doesn't seem to be much upside to this, Jason. Well, let's take our next break, and when we come back, we'll talk about more of the geopolitical implications. I want to get into a little bit about this 1967 space treaty and whether Starfish Prime had an impact on it, why that was written, and how. I'm Rob Maness on Patriot.tv Live. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hi neighbor, Pat Boone here. Today, I want to help you find some peace of mind concerning your money. Like it or not, we're all living in a financial war zone. That's right. We're watching our hard-earned dollars get crushed by inflation. In fact, recently inflation reached its highest level in 40 years. And on top of that, cash, which has always represented freedom and privacy, is more and more being replaced by a cashless system. That's right, powerful forces are definitely waging a war against cash. So I'm encouraging you to prepare before it's too late. Call or text the number on the screen for a free report, The Secret War on Cash from Swiss America. Discover how a few simple steps can protect your money as well as your privacy and your peace of mind. So call or text for your free report, The Secret War on Cash, and make sure to mention Pat Boone sent you.
Sounds rolling, all three cameras, we're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Detonate a nuclear device in a vacuum, most of the damage that you would ever have on Earth comes from a blast wave moving through the air. And if there's no air, the only damage the explosion would give you is you can get an electromagnetic pulse out of it, or there would be sort of radiative damage. But then that's so messy. And so I'm just thinking militaristically. Yeah, I mean, you could target a laser at a sensitive part of a satellite and disable it. You don't have to like blow stuff up.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is part of the story that I think might be confusing to people,
yes.
Which is, what's the point? What could Russia be trying to accomplish? And I mean, with all things, we were talking about the space race earlier, there's going to be a competitive nature of this. If you start to see Russia doing it, you're going to start to see China and the United States. What are the implications of that?
Hence the birth of our Space Force.
Yeah.
Right? They're tasked with protecting our assets in space and making sure that not only protecting the pre-existing assets, but making sure that our future access to space is not denied by an adversary. So this is like part of the prime directive in service of American security.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show on Patriot.tv Live. And we're talking about Russian nukes in space on orbit with spacecraft and space operations leader and retired U.S. Navy Commander Jason Pratt. Well, Jason, just before the break, we were talking, and I mentioned the 1967 Space Treaty and was wondering if Operation Starfish Prime had an impact on the development of that treaty, why it came about, and what the details were in it.
Yeah, it sure did. That space treaty, obviously, anything that we're discussing here as far as nukes in space, other than nuclear power is certainly okay. There's many satellites that are still up there that have that capability, and they're particularly good for very deep space missions, or long duration type missions. But a weaponized satellite with a nuclear capability would be a violation of that treaty. And that treaty was kind of like a freedom of navigation type intention behind it, the ability for all nations to use space for their purposes and freedoms, and to enjoy the benefits of space, such as our navigation capabilities and entertainment purposes, as well as research. And so that was the intent. So that would certainly be a violation, and certainly the Starfish Prime had a lot to do with the understanding and the realization that was certainly needed, something to restrict any future such events.
Yeah, it's again, seems like very high risk. Maybe in the opening clip in this one, they were talking about nuclear powered satellite. Maybe that's what the intelligence was showing. That the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee tried to use as oh my gosh, we're in big trouble and in danger immediately now, although that message fell flat because of what we know about this issue. This has been around a long time, and maybe they're looking to put a nuclear powered satellite up with a much stronger power system to maybe, and DeGrasse mentioned it in that clip, maybe power a laser, an anti-satellite laser weapon on orbit. It'd certainly be easier to have a laser on orbit than on the ground and having to shoot through the atmosphere. I'm a little bit experienced with that kind of thing, and there's a dramatic attenuation effect with altitude and atmosphere and those kind of things. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think John Kirby, or I'm sorry, Mike Turner, was made the announcement that they were in receipt of this intelligence, and it was very concerning. So without knowing what the intelligence is, and he asked the presidency the White House to release it, to declassify it. So I'd be curious to see what maybe specifically was contained in that intelligence. One, two, how what's the certainty level of that intelligence? Was it prognostication or presumption? Did this include actual weaponization or some other aspect of nuclear capability? Nuclear can just be used for generating electricity. 14th of February that Mike Turner made that announcement, and then the day later, John Kirby came out and kind of walked it back a little bit and stressed that no such capability currently existed. And so I think that reduced a little bit some of the hysteria, but it was kind of a curious political escapade, I guess, on what was going on there. So yeah, it's kind of unclear what the actual intentions were and what the benefit of making that announcement at the time, and what the intentions were.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me that to characterize this as an imminent threat when, even a retargeted ICBM shot to reset the warhead for a height of burst, the height of the explosion to the appropriate place can already be done, and it's a known threat, and it is existential. It's important to know this. If you haven't read the book 30 or 1 second after, which is about an EMP attack on the United States, I encourage everybody to go find that. find that book and read about it, Jason, because it is an existential threat. Uh, and as we look at this and the technology related to it, what is the weapon of choice to counter a specific satellite or set of satellites capability from the average observer's perspective? It certainly doesn't look like it's nuclear detonations, especially when you look at that traffic picture that we've been putting up of what everybody's satellites up there. You're going to hurt yourself as much as you hurt anybody else.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The answer to that used to be to understand the satellite orbits and understand maybe their mission profile and when they were overhead, and simply you would, if you didn't want them listening, seeing, or what have you, then you would just hide from them, and so you could mitigate that through OPSEC or a ConOps mitigation. But the traffic jam in space, it's so crowded up there that pretty much you're under surveillance of one shape or form almost 24/7. So to avoid it now, there's anything really is going to be classified at this point to kind of go, well, what do you do about it? Yeah, I think that's about all I can say about that.
Well, let's go over to our live audience and see if we've got a question. Kat and Shell, I think I see a hand up over there.
Yeah, that would be me. About a week ago, we had that thing with the alleged solar flares. I say that because not everybody believes it, where cell phone service was knocked out for multiple hours. And I'm making a reference specifically to what can we do as just average citizens to protect ourselves against an EMP. I mean, I realize we can't stop it from happening, but is there like maybe a top 3 things that you would do, like have a backup satellite phone or any of those things to maybe be able to still communicate, because people lost their minds. That just those few hours that they didn't have cell service, I thought people were just going to completely lose it. So I'm just wondering what you guys think.
Go ahead, Jason. I'll let you take your first shot at that.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question and timely. So I would say number one, just preparedness, right? I think American resiliency and general preparedness has in some respects gone by the wayside. So I think being prepared, and not just for an EMP, because the preparedness that you would put into place would protect you if there's a hurricane, a severe winter storm, tornado, earthquake, or a sunspot, a serious solar storm. We're in solar storm season 25, or solar cycle 25 as it's called, and that's what we saw. It's ramping up to the summer of 2025, where the solar storm should be at their worst. And so we saw what's known as an X-event storm. Fortunately, there were no coronal mass ejections or CMEs from that, which would produce a lot more, or a lot of what we would call heavy particles, protons in particular, heavily charged protons. So what can you do? One, communications. Have some communications. Get an EMP bag, or make yourself a Faraday cage. There's some good videos out there on the internet on how to make a Faraday cage out of a trash can and a plastic bin inside that trash can and some aluminum foil tape. So do that. I have that. Have some radios, just some good UHF, VHF radios available. You can use FRS, Family Radio Service, or GMRS with a license. That's the global or general mobile radio service. So have those where you can talk to friends and family, check on them, or listen to NOAA and other. It requires no license to listen to any frequency, so you can tune those into various frequencies and just try to get some information as far as what's going on, and keep maybe 2 radios in a bag or in a Faraday cage. So I think for that purpose it'd be very important. I think 1 Second After is a great read, as well as Blackout Wars by Dr. Peter Pry. So those are some books that would be worth getting and looking into, because they provide some good information and scenarios for you to consider.
Yeah, great answer and great question, Kat. Of course, there are lots of tools that we could use, and in the next segment, I want to get into. I think your site is called toolsofliberty.org, Jason,
Sure.
where you go in depth on those kinds of tactics, techniques, procedures, and equipment and everything, because it's very important that everybody know. I mean, somebody as old as Jason and I, we kind of understand this. We've studied it for most of our adult lives. We've read about it. We've developed war plans to defend against it and those kinds of things. But the average citizen doesn't know that. And we rely, as the cell phone panic, apparently there was a panic, shows us that most people don't really understand what's happening, what the devices are, as far as how much they use them, how they rely upon them so much. And maybe this show will help get some training out to folks that really didn't have a good understanding of that. Well, we've got to take our last break. So we'll be coming back with spacecraft and operations expert Jason Pratt to talk more about Russian nukes. And kind of my main question after all this is, what's the point, before we get into his website company, toolsofliberty.org. I'm Rob Maness on Patriot.tv Live.
We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
The markets are getting crazy, and now is the time to protect yourself from economic turmoil. Silver is in the headlines right now and creating lots of excitement as the price of silver is extremely attractive compared to gold. A call to Swiss America gets you the scoop on whether the silver opportunity is for real. What you'll discover will really blow your mind. Today, silver faces a huge shortage due to the rising demand by military, solar, electric cars, and computers, all of which depend on silver. But right now, silver is priced to sell according to worldwide experts. Now, to help you get started, Swiss America is offering beautiful United States Walking Liberty half dollars, issued by the U.S. Mint from 1916 to 1947 and minted in 90% pure silver for a special introductory price. Limit of $250 per customer while supplies last. So call the number on your screen or visit SwissAmerica.com, because now is the time to rediscover silver.
Tell you that in terms of destroying another satellite, like I said, there are already ways to do that. There are these sort of what they call kinetic kills, where you can take a missile, no explosives necessary at all, because the satellite's already moving 18,000 miles an hour. All you have to do is get in its way and the thing explodes. Russia's done it, China's done it, we've done it, India has done it. And then you can target the satellite at will. If you're stuck in orbit, you might not be near a satellite that you want to take out. You have to wait until the orbits line up. This just seems so inefficient.
Yeah.
So I'm just skeptical of how dangerous this thing can be relative to everyone's emotions attached to it.
It seems to suggest that there's probably some more to the story here about what's really going on. It seems like also the United States is not super concerned about this in this moment. They say this could be some years away for whatever this is to actually materialize
right.
and be deployed
Right.
out into space,
Right. So,
into the universe, I should say.
like I said, anything that people fear of it, we already have the capability of accomplishing.
Right. It's just maybe a different version of
Possibly a
something that we
different
can
version.
do. Yeah.
Electromagnetic pulse is interesting. You can send a pulse of electromagnetic energy that basically fries all electric circuits in a region. There's some movies that have portrayed this, by the way. One of them was Ocean's 11, by the
Oh,
way.
okay.
They created an EMP.
That's not the movie I thought you were going to say.
No, it knocked out the power grid to Las Vegas so
Right.
they can complete their heist. But if you do that, then you're taking out, you know how many satellites? There are thousands of satellites.
It's a little
and not all of
imprecise.
them are just your enemy's satellite in one zone. Everybody's got satellites crossing. It should be viewed as sort of sacred international space.
Yeah.
And it's not, like international waters.
Hence the reason why we have Space Force, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Neil
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show on Patriot.tv Live. It's Training Tuesday, and we're training on Russian nukes in space and how it measures up to the American national security needs, the subject, what the weapons would do, the risk associated. And we're talking with space operations expert Jason Pratt about this issue. And Jason, Neil Tyson just kind of nailed it for me is, what's the point? The risk to global navigation, comms, even trade, even research stations around the world, not to mention what would happen in the military and intelligence worlds if the Russians decide to not just put something on orbit, but actually use it from orbit, are just way out of the field at the point where you'd have to be taking as much risk as launching a nuclear attack on another nuclear nation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, Neil's segment there was spot on, and he's right. There's, why use that kind of weapon when there's so many others at your disposal to, like I mentioned, directed energies, even just cyber attacks, or you can kinetic kill a ground station and or jam. Jamming is quite easy. That's happening right now in the Middle East, all over the place. Israel and Syria, they've been conducting jamming there, as Russia. They took out their own systems a little bit, jamming against potential threats against Ukraine and their use of Starlink and some other spacecraft. So there are other ways to do it, and so putting a nuke in space is kind of using a sledgehammer to maybe take out an ant. And not only that, but then the impacts would be global. They would be felt all the way down to third world countries, and for peaceful purposes as well. So I think just strategically and tactically speaking, mostly unnecessary, and so not clear yet what the intention would be there. So I would just kind of sit on my hands and look. I would like to backtrack real quick to back to AJ's question too. I don't want the Air Force to take all the credit for shooting down a satellite, because the Navy did it. The Navy did it in February 2008. Operation Burnt Frost took down a satellite. It was deorbiting, so all of its energy was already kind of proceeding towards the Earth. It was coming out of the sky, and the Navy used it was USS Lake Erie with an SM-3, was able to shoot down one of our satellites, our intelligence satellites, re-entering the atmosphere, and that did it in such a way that all the momentum was kind of carrying already towards Earth, and so all the debris fell to Earth and didn't pollute space. Russia did it. Let's see, what was the year? Russia did it as well after China did in 2008. Russia did it in 2021, so pretty recent. And that debris has impacted the space station. Some small parts of it, and other larger parts have gotten close to it. So Russia, with their own cosmonauts on board the International Space Station, not a real smart move. And so that's I think most of the international community, as well as Russia, China, India, America, the spacefaring nations, understand that. And I don't see that being the primary threat. I see other threat vectors being more significant.
Yeah, it makes to those of us in the national security field, we're puzzled by this, the release of the information in a panic, so-called panic, and then once we start peeling the layers back, and I had to refresh myself on the technology and go, okay, I know about this. I mean, the United States has been able to take out a satellite for decades, it's not earth-shattering news that the superpowers of the world, or near superpowers of the world, would want to be able to eliminate their adversaries' satellites and communications. The big question, like I said, is the risks are just enormous, especially for your own, committing fratricide on yourself and your own capability and equipment. I mean, this would have to be a really last ditch into the world type strategy to even pull the trigger on one. Say they got them up there and were able to check them operationally without conducting a nuclear test. But knowing the Russians, they will want to do a test of some sort. Could you imagine that another test outside of the atmosphere in the current, especially congested traffic environment, and what that would do?
Yeah, I don't think. I think a test would be catastrophic. So not a good thing. Being a former test pilot, that would be really taking a test flight that would end in your obvious demise without any mitigation to the risks. So I don't see Russia doing that. That wouldn't help them. Little to gain in doing that. I think something maybe more novel and upcoming would be something we call prox ops or proximity ops, where another satellite comes close to a satellite in order to intercept it, to touch it, to grab it, to pull it, to move it, to interfere with it, various other things. So we saw that in the comedy Space Force that was on a couple years ago. And to me, that would be more significant because there's a legitimate need for proximity operations of satellites to extend the missions of satellites, to maybe do on-orbit refueling, maybe to tow a satellite back to its orbit, because sometimes satellites degrade their orbits and can't get back, as well as just cleaning up space junk. There's a lot of studies going on to produce missions that would be able to retrieve all the space junk that's up there, rocket bodies and upper stages and separation systems and dead satellites, and pull them to another location, either a disposal orbit well above GEO or re-enter a re-entry so they could be burned up. So, but masked in that could obviously be military interests.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier, before I let you go, I want to talk about your project, toolsofliberty.org. You mentioned some things you could do like Faraday bags, Faraday cages, EMP bags, radio comms, and those kind of things. Tell the folks about that project and what it might be able to do for them.
Yeah, thank you. So Tools of Liberty, I'm just starting to build that out now, kind of based on this need and my own preparation for my family and friends and loved ones. So an organization I like to make people aware of is American Contingency. That was started by former Green Beret Mike Glover. I think that's a great organization. I'm not associated with them, so I have nothing to gain from that. But I will be pursuing them to do more. And the intent there is to go back to our founding and see what our patriot founding fathers did to create an amazing, the greatest experiment in human government, and what we can do to keep that alive and as well as just keep ourselves safe. Dr. Peter McCullough, in that advertisement you had, very apt during the pandemic. People were unprepared everywhere from toilet paper to medicines, and so I'll be sharing some of the capabilities and offering solutions for people for communications, for food, for medical care, for coordination,